Guitar strings. More to the point, changing guitar strings. An utter pain in the fingers. This rudimentary neck support I made from a small offcut has two channels, so I support either acoustic or electric guitars. However, as you can see here, I didn't leave enough height to access the winders, and it was more unstable than a hammock in a hurricane. So it's time for a new one. This time I'm not taking any chances, so I found an offcut from a garden sleeper, good and chunky with plenty of space. As the workshop was having one of its more domestic periods, I opted not to bring out the big gun powered saws and do the whole thing by hand. Stuff like this workout makes me wonder why I'm not thinner, but I guess we'll never know the answer to that one. This was a substantial workout of sawing, planing and scraping, aiming to get the block to roughly the correct size. However, I did make a slightly significant mistake, which I'll come back to later. Having marked out roughly where the support channel would go, it was time to make the block wedge shaped to give the neck end some elevation. I must confess that I guessed what angle to shape the thing at, theorising that as long as it doesn't wobble and I can access the winders, I'll be a happy strummer. Discovering this pool of resin, I briefly considered trapping a small insect in it to confuse the scientists of the future, but decided that trapping my saw blade and various chisels in it was much more fun. Because I was filming this project, I decided to make it a bit more interesting than a simple block of exterior pine, and add a bit of unnecessary detail in the form of some walnut I found in the scrap pile. So I marked out some edging slots, which I also cut while I was cutting the neck channel. Or, to be more precise, running the router backwards and forwards at varying depths to clear out the bulk of the material. I then enthusiastically set about the remaining fluff with chisels, rasps and sandpaper until I had something vaguely resembling a channel. I did have to use the old glue and sawdust technique here, as the pine was quite splintery and left a few gaps along the edge. But once the walnut strips had been glued in and everything sort of cleaned up, it looked okay. I decided also to add some randomly angled end profiles, and when I say randomly, I did just set the gauge to whatever looked nice and went with it. If you look carefully, which I didn't, you may notice the residue of the resin from earlier. Believe me when I say it adds nothing to the cutting capabilities of the average saw. And just time to reshape the channel and give it a final sand before dinner. After a good night's sleep, I woke up to find the first frosty morning of the season. And, having examined the dahlia corpses, I mused that it was the sort of day to do something a little bit different and a little bit cosier. So, I stoked up my cheap fake fire from out of Amazon and set to work on a completely new skill. Now, here there is a little caveat. Yes, this project is not the most inspiring. I mean, anyone with a block of wood and a saw can put this together. But aside from wanting to be able to restring my guitar more easily, I had another, more ulterior motive, and that is this that you can see going on here. For my next project, texture is more important than visuals. So, in agreement with the client for that project, I decided on some kind of carving. And, with sound economical and practical thinking, my reasoning was to practice with the tools on something which wasn't that important, and to try out some design ideas. Mostly though, it was a good way of prototyping a technique. It also demonstrates a principle that sometimes it's just nice to go with the flow and design on the fly. There is a freedom and a feeling of connecting with the impulsive creative bit of your brain, rather than the bit that has refined an idea to the point of beige. Spoiler, this design is not quite what ends up in the next project, but may well in another, as I quite like the contrast of solid geometry and flowery trailing detail. Has a sort of Art Nouveau feel to it. As it turns out, and following more practice sinks, softwood is harder to do this on than hardwood, as the wide grain tends to divert the tool. As you can see when I tried to carve the K of my logo, the thing went everywhere, and once you have a line the tool just wants to keep on going. This is something I wasn't happy with, but without a real alternative I carried on. The other thing I wanted to test here was burning. This won't be used in anything I have planned yet, but was also an idea to snazz up what is still a slightly fancified block of garden rubbish. I do quite like the effect here, as it highlights the more resinous grain lines. Haven't tried it on any hardwoods yet, so I'm not sure what the effect will be. That is something for another day. Right now, I'm more concerned about my dodgy K symbol. My first thought was to drill it out and plug it. I managed to drill out a hole to match the diameter of this hole saw, but realised with a palm to the face that hole saws leave a central hole which would then also need patching. The answer was to continue the channel round the back. Will serve no functional purpose, but will look better than either the K or the badly planned excavation hole. Cue another protracted period of rasping and sanding. Just a few more jobs to do. I lined the channel with cork to protect the finish on the neck of whichever of my many guitars I'm restringing. With hindsight, I might have used something else as the edges of the cork frayed quite a bit, but as a functional piece that will never leave my house, I'm not that bothered. However, if I was to make one to order, see my website for details, I might sub the cork with felt. Oh yes, I also added some corky foot pads to stop it slipping. Then a few coats of Danish oil, which I thought really helped to bring out the effect of the burning. So if you've made it this far, first of all, a huge thank you. It really means a lot to me. Secondly, you may remember that earlier I mentioned a significant error. Well, as I prepared to test the block, it occurred to me that it was only going to be usable for electric guitars, as it's not nearly tall enough to lift the neck of an acoustic. So I might need another version, but that's for the future. In the meantime, I'll leave you not with the traditional beauty shots, but a practical demonstration. Thanks for watching.